Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our webinar on green infrastructure. My name is Eleanor from manuelsriver, and we've partnered with the town of CBS to bring you this webinar as a part of what we've been working on here last spring and through the summer. We've put a couple of green infrastructure items in along our trails. We have some rain barrels now in our community garden, and we also have a rain garden that has been generously helped out by some funding from the TD Green Spaces and the Arbor Day group who have generously given us some grant money towards that. So I think we do have one of our attendees present. So welcome to Blair, and hopefully any other attendees who have signed in now will soon arrive. We will get started. You're more than welcome throughout the green infrastructure webinar to type in any questions you may have in the chat feature down below, and my co-host Lisa Marie will let us know if there's anything that we need to answer for you. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And I guess we'll go ahead and get started if everyone is ready. No objections. So welcome everybody to our green infrastructure webinar, Practical Green Solutions. And the idea of this webinar is that we will be able to have everyone who is living in CBS and maybe even beyond the town of CBS understand the benefits of using green infrastructure and how they themselves as residents can implement some of these green infrastructure solutions. So you can see in the little infographic that we have below the title here on the first slide that we can have things such as green belts, green roofs, green walls, tree-lined streets. We can have things like bio-solar roofs, green belts, construction wetlands, some underground water storage, things like permeable pavement. All of that type of things, rain gardens can also work to help us. And some of the benefits there, you also may note, are increase of panel efficiency, recreation space, water and storage management, reduction of sewage loads, absorption of CO2, creation of new habitats, and absorption of other pollutants, as well as acoustic pollution, something that we don't always think of when we think of pollution. But all of these things can add up to make our community really a lot more livable and a lot more enjoyable to live in, and a lot healthier, not just for the humans, but also for all of the other living things that we share space with. Also, I think I forgot to mention the reduction of water runoff, which is going to be a big one going forward. So moving on to our next slide now, just what is green infrastructure? Some of you may be familiar with it, or you may have heard of some ideas, or it may be brand new to you. And we have green infrastructure here as an approach to natural resource management. And it really has the mindset that nature knows best. So we're mimicking natural systems that Mother Nature's already put in place to keep air and water and soil clean and healthy. And we're able to incorporate the natural environment, hopefully, into our engineered systems. And it's an alternative to our traditional infrastructure in the industrial age that sometimes works against nature and can be quite detrimental. We can do a lot of damage to habitats, which is not just dangerous for plants and animals, but also very unhealthy for human beings as well. So we know that green infrastructure can be not only a more economically friendly, but also an environmentally friendly and more sustainable way of doing things. And it's really a way of working with nature instead of against nature. And we find that Mother Nature is quite powerful, and that generally when you want to have her on your side, you're going to have a great ally, but when you try to work against her, you may be headed for some trouble. A little bit egotistical of us human beings to think that we can trump nature or conquer nature. She's been around long before us, and I'm sure she'll be around long after us as well. So something to keep in mind is how can we going forward do things a little bit differently that serves everyone involved. And you see in the picture below some solar panels and some wind turbines, just some ideas there of how you can be more in tune with nature, and keeping in mind that we as human beings are actually a part of nature. We're not separate from it. So if we look at some of the benefits of implementing green infrastructure, we know that they're environmental, yes, for sure. There are also economic benefits and social benefits as well. And when we think about this, we can think about the idea of an ounce of prevention is worth really a pound of cure. So it's really a lot about not polluting in the first place, not doing damage in the first place, not interfering with natural systems in the first place as much as we can, to let them be, and then wherever possible to use the ingenuity as inspiration for our new innovation when we construct things, when we build things. And if we mimic what we see in nature, we will come up with some really great ideas, I think. So some of the other benefits that you note here are heat reduction. It's a big one as we face things like climate change and global warming. We also want to have increased biodiversity, and this is a great benefit. Variety, you know, the spice of life, and each ecosystem is really enriched by having a good level of biodiversity. Filtration, not just of air, but also water and soil. And when we're talking about pollution that we see in the oceans, somewhere in the area of 80% of the pollution that we see in our oceans today really starts on land. So filtration is a big one for some of these green infrastructure items, because when we think about a lot of the surfaces that we have in big cities, they're impermeable. We don't allow for filtration when it comes to concrete and pavement and things like that. But with green infrastructure, we would allow for filtration instead to keep it clean and healthy. We'll have improved ecosystem services, which are, in addition to the filtration of air and water and soil, also things like flood management, prevention of flash flooding, which is a big one as we see big rainstorms coming and larger amounts of water in general falling. Of course, cleaner water, which is wonderful for every living thing. We need water to survive. We're here living on this blue planet, one of the only planets that we know of right now that sustains life as we know it. So without water, we're in big trouble, and our water needs to be clean for us to consume it and to make the best use out of it. We're 3/4 water, and so is the Earth's surface. Maybe that's a coincidence, maybe that's not, but clean water is something I think everybody can appreciate. Food security, another big benefit of green infrastructure. We want everyone to be able to have healthy food and good access to food, especially on an island where we are, where we know that when we saw earlier in 2020, what a scramble that was when people thought that their food sources could be threatened or that they might not have access to food, what panic that can create, and how could we avoid that and make sure that everyone has enough food to eat. One of the best benefits, probably visually, aesthetically, is just the beautification of the built environment rather than these cold, stark grays and blacks and browns, these brick and concrete cities, having green spaces. And that's not just good because it looks pretty, but it also has really good benefits to our mental health. And we're seeing mental health as a bigger and bigger issue, especially in some city environments. And we see that people living in more space, open space, and green space having better mental health. Better creativity as well, and better just breathing room, I think. And when we feel that resources are tight and they are limited, that increases competition in an ecosystem when it comes to wildlife, and it does the same thing for human beings as well. So when we feel that everybody has enough and we live in a beautiful environment, there is a sense of peace and well-being coming over us. Hopefully we have less drive to be less kind or less giving. We have more space to give. One of the other benefits here is carbon sequestration, which is a big one when we talk about carbon footprints and carbon emissions. We know that carbon emissions driving quite a lot of what we're seeing in climate change and global warming in regards to the speed with which it seems to be moving at and the intensity and how drastic it is coming upon us. So if we can sequester that carbon and hold it like is naturally done in a regular wetland, if we can recreate that in among our cities, then we will definitely see benefits of that. And not to mention many other benefits, I'm sure, as well. You see in the little infographic below, groundwater recharge, heat stress reduction, water quality improvement, food security, recreation, amenity and aesthetics, biodiversity enhancement, air quality improvement, energy savings, and these benefits are for everybody involved. So really a great reason to think about implementing some green infrastructure yourselves. And some good examples of green infrastructure are things like green walls, rain gardens, rain barrels, moss lawns, green roofs, pervious pavement, wildlife overpasses, vegetative or bioswales, urban tree cover, and perforated pipes. So really thinking here about increasing the amount of plant material on just about every surface you can think of, and having a way for wildlife to move throughout these human spaces that we've taken over, and allow for them to be part of where we live as well. Having the tree cover, preventing shade, or giving shade rather, preventing too much UV penetration coming down from the sun there, and a lot of the warming issues that we are facing. The great thing about keeping a lot of good tree cover too, besides the fact that it provides shade and habitat for other living things, is that the root systems of the trees are going to really help to prevent quite a lot of erosion, which can be problematic when it comes to runoff as well. So we'll look a little bit more closely now at some of these examples, and we'll get to see some of the ones that we have here at Manuels River. So the big one for us now is our rain garden that we just introduced with the help of the grants that we spoke of earlier, and also the green team from the Conservation Corps came and did a lot of the manual labor today, this spring, of putting our rain garden into place. So our rain garden is just over along the upstream trail right before you get to our gazebo and our campfire area. And it is in between where the Manuels River path is and where the Manuels access road is. So the idea is that all that runoff coming down off the highway would be coming into the banks, moving through the trails, and then eventually moving through what we call the riparian zone and into the river. And of course, any pollution that goes into our river, in our puddles, in our ponds, our lakes, our creeks, our streams, any of our wetlands, that's all headed eventually for the ocean. So that's the big picture that we want to keep in mind there. And we have the rain garden really mimicking a natural wetland. So in a natural wetland, we have a good 3-tier filter system put in place by Mother Nature, where the big trees of the boreal forest that surround the wetland will use their larger roots to filter some of the water coming down from higher to lower as it falls along the banks of the river and moves through the roots of the trees. The bigger particles of gunk and junk and stuff that we don't want to end up in the river is held back. And then as it moves into what we call the riparian zone, or the transition zone between the forest and the river itself, all these wetland plants have much smaller roots, and they filter out some of the medium-sized particles of gunk and junk and stuff that we don't want to enter our river system. And then the fine clay soil in which these riparian zone or wetland plants grow, it helps to block out some of the very smallest particles of gunk and junk that we don't want to end up in our river. So our rain garden is much like that. And we have created it. It's man or human made, woman made too, but it's meant to be just like a natural wetland. And so we've used this concept that, you know, gravity's acting on everything on Earth, water included. So water is going to fall from the sky and hits the highest point of the land, and then it runs down and always will find the lowest point. Water is quite lazy, we'll say, is in it always takes the path of least resistance to find its way down to that low point. So we just made it easy for the water to move through our rain garden. And you can just imagine there are sort of concentric circles. The outside edges of the rain garden are sort of shallower and then gradually getting deeper and deeper as those concentric circles move in to the center. And you can see here, there's this downsloped edge, and we use special absorbent soil. We use things like compost and mulch to help to layer in beneath the plants there. And we can incorporate what's called sphagnum moss, which is a really special wetland plant. You often see it growing in bogs. And sphagnum moss actually is one of the most absorbent plants on the go. It can absorb 20 to 30 times its dry weight in water. So absorbent that some of the soldiers during World War I would have used it to prevent bleeding of wounds when they didn't have bandages out in the field. And some indigenous people would have actually used sphagnum moss to help to diaper their babies. So it's been useful to people for quite a long time, and it can work really well in a rain garden when you're trying to help absorb some of the water. And what happens in a rain garden then is when we get a big heavy rain, or if we get a lot of snow melt and quite a bit of runoff happening, is that these natural wetlands and these man-made or human-made wetlands, like our rain garden, will hold the water, and they will release it slowly, a little bit at a time, just like a sponge. And they will also hold quite a lot of the carbon from the atmosphere and just release it slowly. So it's good storage for water and for carbon. And in the process, they end up filtering out all the yuckiness. So if you have a natural low point in your property, that could be a good site for a rain garden. They're really not that hard to install, and you really want to think about using native plants wherever possible and using water-loving plants. Some of the plants that we used were our trailing juniper, which is a low-growing evergreen shrub, and we used some sweet gale, which is also found all along the edges of Manuels River in our riparian zone. And the blue flag iris is another beautiful purpley blue flower that comes early in the spring. So those are just a couple of examples, but we do have some other plants as well. And you could find any number of plants locally that would work well. We used Todd Boland from the Botanical Gardens as a great resource to consult with, and you can find lists of native plants online as well. Things like red osier dogwood, anything that you would see naturally growing in a wetland here is probably a good contender for your rain garden. So the wonderful thing about them is that they will withstand this short-term flooding. They'll help promote drainage. If they're constructed properly, they will not be breeding ground for mosquitoes, because they should drain within 24 to 48 hours if they're put into place properly. So you check the slope, and you kind of do a little site survey before you select the area. But this series of water-loving vegetation, absorbent soil, and the downslope edging creates this natural little pocket or pool for the water to hang out in just for a little while until it's ready to release. And there's a little picture of our rain garden, and it's just started now, so it's quite small, but you can see that the highway here in the background would, where we don't have any big forest or big trees, would mean that all the runoff from all those pollutants from any of the cars that may go by would be running down the slope and eventually heading into the river, which is heading in to the ocean. So we want to keep it really nice and clean as much as we can. So we hope that this will be a great filter and a really nice low maintenance garden once it gets going. A little bit of work in the beginning, but these plants, because they're native, know what to do. They're in a location where they're happy enough, and they should really just flourish. So after the first year or so, shouldn't be too much maintenance, which is great. So we also have at Manuel's River a rain barrel or two up by our new community garden, which is up near the front of the interpretation center, just off to the side there by our greenhouse. And rain barrel is pretty easy to put in place. It's just a large barrel or a bucket, and it's connected to a gutter or a funnel. A lot of people will use them off the top of the roof of whatever building they have, a shed, a garage, or the house. Ours are just coming off of our brand new greenhouse. So when you're thinking about using these, they're going to collect and store rainwater and rainwater runoff. So once again, it can be released slowly rather than a big flash flood happening. And we can use the water for watering things like veggie gardens or flowers or grass, whatever you have there. We just want to make sure that you do not have like an asphalt roof if you're going to be thinking about watering plants that you intend to eat. So if you're just watering the flowers, no big deal. But if you are watering something that you hope will be edible, just want to watch what surfaces the water is running off of and make sure that it's not bringing anything with it. You can see in our little diagram here, there's a little downspout near the top and a little screen, which keeps mosquitoes from entering and breeding in the barrel, as well as keeping leaf and other debris out of the water there. And you have a little overflow spout near the top, which can just spill out over the edge, or if you wanted, you could have a second or a third barrel, a little faucet near the bottom here with a hose, so that you can hook that up and spray your garden with some clean water, and a little raised platform as well. So a beautiful way to make use of the water that's already falling. So there are some examples here in this picture as well. You can see they have a platform which has 3 barrels, so they're going to collect quite a lot of water there. And we'll enjoy that there is very little maintenance here once it's installed. Once again, no real plumbing, and you'll have fewer instances of pollution in the water here. It's just coming straight off of whatever surface, but we still, as we mentioned, wouldn't use it for drinking, or you wouldn't use it for watering plants that you're going to eat rather, if it is coming off of an asphalt roof. If you have a metal roof, or we have a corrugated plastic roof on our greenhouse, then that would be fine. And this protects drinking water resources by making use of water that's already falling to water our plants. We can save water that is already clean and filtered for drinking, which is great. So one other idea for green infrastructure is plant or green wall, which is vertically built structure covered by some source of vegetation. Could be an indoors or an outdoors plant or green wall, and preferably you would use native plants, so this reduces the risk of species being introduced and becoming invasive. And usually you might choose something that is a climbing plant, like a vine or vertical planter. You might use the help of something like a trellis, a little green climber or green module there, and whatever your growing media is going to be. And these are wonderful because they are going to reduce harmful pollutants from the air. You know, having plants helps to clean the air as we exchange our oxygen and carbon dioxide with them. They do the opposite of what we breathe. So we get rid of our stale, old, yucky carbon dioxide that we don't need anymore, and that's what they love to take in. And then they, as a waste product, will expel their old, stale oxygen, which to us is fresh, brand new oxygen, which we love to breathe in. And you can hope that they will help to moderate temperature, so you may not need as much heating and cooling going on inside a building, and within a city, definitely reducing some of those like black and dark surfaces that would attract a lot of sunlight. Of course, they're going to improve things like biodiversity, provide maybe some habitat if they're outside for some living things, reduce things like noise pollution and rain runoff, and you will experience whether you realize it or not, oftentimes reduce stress and an improved sense of well-being in green spaces. Some of you may have heard of this concept of forest bathing that is really big, Shinrin Yoku. It comes from Japanese culture. There's quite a lot of science being done now about how just being out in nature, just being in those green spaces, when you're around plants, they are naturally giving off essential oils, and you're breathing them in every time you inhale. And that helps to up all of the happy, good cells in the body, and that helps to get rid of or down, reduce all of the nasty, yucky cells. So it really helps your immunity as well, which we've seen in the last year or so to be quite a big deal, especially in big cities, crowded spaces. We want people to be really healthy. So not to mention it also just gives you a nice peaceful feeling, the sense of well-being that you experience in nature. Shinrin Yoku, or forest bathing, improved by the idea of green walls and green roofs, just to give everybody that chance to be around nature, and reduces feelings like anger and frustration. That kind of stuff can just kind of give you a chance to be more mindful and to take a breath away from the rest of the world when you're in a green space like that. So another great example of green infrastructure is green driveways, and they can be used, as your main driveway, or if you maybe have alternate vehicles like campers or boats, and you don't want to give up your entire lawn as a gravel pit or as a paved surface. There are great little apparatus that you can get online, and sometimes they'll have like a honeycomb structure or other shapes, and you lay them down sort of as like a little mat, and they help to stabilize either gravel or grass. And they're much more environmentally friendly alternative to your traditional paved driveways, because paved driveways, asphalt, concrete, are not permeable. So the water has to run over the surface, taking everything with it. But when we have permeable surfaces, they make much better filters. So the rainwater can trickle down through whatever vegetation or gravel you have there, and the soil helps to filter the water naturally without really having to add much other man-made or human-made infrastructure to do a lot of expensive water filtration or water treatment. So these little honeycomb structures, if you use that shape, or otherwise these mats that hold the soil in place, help to stabilize the gravel or the grass so that it can also be used for parking, moving large vehicles, and it won't tear up your lawn. So you can see some examples here, and it just looks really lovely. It's just a continuation of your yard or your lawn. So we have improved filtration, reduced rainwater runoff, once again, prevention of flooding and erosion. Erosion, a really big deal when it comes to water quality, because as soil erodes into waterways, the water becomes quite turbid or murky and cloudy, and all these suspended particles then attract sunlight, which increases water temperatures, and as water temperatures go up, dissolved oxygen goes down, and this will affect all the other abiotic qualities in the water, which can lead to a much less hospitable or enjoyable habitat for creatures like benthic macroinvertebrates, which are just like little bugs and critters near the bottom of the river. And they make up, not the very basis, but some of the earlier steps in most of our food chains and food webs. And of course, most fish have a really, really narrow range of tolerance when it comes to temperature. So they like it within the specific range that they are used to. And turbidity caused by erosion of soil can be a real problem for them. And then, of course, that affects every other living thing rippling on out from there, because every ecosystem has such a delicate balance. So we have much less maintenance for a driveway here. You don't have to worry about sealing your driveway every year. You maybe just mow across and away you go. Another option, if you're not a fan of mowing, is a moss lawn. A great way to have some soft, cushy, pillowy greenery in your lawn, but you don't have to worry about the grass reaching your knees if you forget it for a week or two. I actually have a moss lawn in my backyard, and we enjoy it just the way we would a regular yard. It's quite lovely. I even have chanterelle mushrooms growing in my backyard this fall. So there's this lovely benefit to leaving spaces as wild and as natural as they can be, rather than having everything being manicured just so, and trying to sort of trump nature or one-up nature by making your yard be just so particular. So you can have it be a little bit wild, and there's quite a lot of beauty in that. When we see wildflowers, we know we have great options for our pollinators, and having moss lawns gives this dense green, low-lying mat of turf-like grassy surface, but it is quite soft and pillowy, and really no trouble to maintain whatsoever. So you can see some examples of moss lawns there in the pictures, and they look really beautiful. You're going to reduce some water runoff once again. They can be quite absorbent depending on what type of moss you have. Little to no maintenance and reduced emissions when you're thinking no gas lawnmower. Reduced erosion of soil, again, more of that carbon sequestration, which we know is so important to keeping the emissions low so that we can protect our ozone layer, so we don't have these gaping holes where sunlight and UV rays that are harmful are penetrating through. And hopefully that helps us with our global warming issues. They require much less water than grass, and these moss lawns can survive in many different conditions, which, if we know we are going to have changing weather conditions in the future, could be quite a good thing, because it may not be as predictable as it has been in the past, because the patterns of the past aren't what we're going to probably see in the near future. So why green infrastructure? In addition to all the benefits we've already talked about, all the beauty, all the health benefits, in hopes that we might slow some of the global warming and climate change projection, or mitigate where we can. You also see that we have projected in the future increased amounts of precipitation, increased temperatures, and much more intense and extreme weather events than what we've been used to, and possibly even sea level rise. So this is going to be a wet future coming up. So ways to manage water are really important. And when we think about climate change, we know that 4.6 billion years Earth has been here. The climate has been changing. There's always been ups and downs in temperature and water levels. The polar ice caps have always advanced and receded according to if they're melting or freezing. We've seen land masses colliding together and separating apart. We've seen mountains being built and eroded. So much change has happened on Earth's history. It's not that the change is happening that we're concerned about at all. It's just the idea that this change now is happening much faster, much more drastically, and it's going to be more extreme than what we've expected in the past. And we think that this time, the difference now is that human beings and our activities could be driving the change that's happening in this way. So if that's the case, then we really want to do everything we can to slow that down, to mitigate that whenever possible, and to do our part, not just for all of the human beings here on Earth, but all the other living things that we share this planet with as well. So if you look at some of the climate drivers there, like temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise, it gives you a summary of some projected changes. So average annual temperatures expected to increase 1.4 degrees Celsius between 2021 this year and 2050 range, and then another 3.2 degrees Celsius between 2051 and 2080. And 2080 may sound like really far away for some of you, but if you think about it, if there is someone alive today who could potentially be alive at that time, or if your kids or grandkids or children that you know now growing up could be alive, then it's really not that far away. The largest seasonal temperature increases they're expecting to be in the summer. I recently heard on the radio that we just had one of the third warmest summers on record here in Newfoundland, and that we're in for a mild fall. So we may see days where we have greater than 27 degrees Celsius And that may increase from 2 days a year historically to 3 days a year by 2050 and up to 22 days by the year 2080 or so. So we love mild weather. We love it when it's nice and sunny, and we enjoy all that here in Newfoundland, but that is going to also have much different effects in other parts of the planet where it won't be as seasonable, as livable in other areas. And ironically, unfortunately, most of the areas that are going to be most harshly affected by climate change, they're predicting, are a lot of the areas that are poorer countries and areas that are least equipped to be able to deal with these changes, to be able to rebound from them and to be able to brace themselves from some of these extreme weather events. So we want to do what we can here because that affects everywhere. And if everybody gets on board, we have maybe some hope of making some real change. For precipitation, you're looking at annual average increase between 82 millimeters from now until 2050 to 124 millimeters from 2051 to 2080. And the largest seasonal precipitation increase in winter and spring. Makes sense. If most of our snow turns to rain and then we have lots of melt of whatever snow there is. Some trends show that precipitation events are expected to become more intense and more extreme. And then some freezing rain events are projected to increase in the months of December, January, and February. And we know that severe freezing rain events bring with them all kinds of issues with regarding to our electrical power outages, that kind of stuff, and other damages as well. So they're expected to increase to more than 6 hours per day, about 50% by the year 2100. And sea level rise, looking like it is predicted to increase 60 to 80 centimeters by 2100, and 95th percentile projections depict an increase of 100 to 120 centimeters of relative sea level rise by that time. So that's quite a lot of sea level rise, and it will impact low-lying and coastal areas. So it really makes you think about how can you build smart and build with a plan in mind if you're thinking about what's to come. So I want to just move along now to our last slide, which is a big thank you to everyone who has come today to view the webinar, and anyone who watches the recording of the webinar. Thank you for having us. Some of our partners here, we want to thank the town of CBS, TD, Green Spaces, the Arbor Day Foundation, the crowd at Manuels River who helped out with researching and planning for the garden, and as well our green team from the Conservation Corps who helped to install it. And some additional resources for you there if you are interested to find out more. You can check out the Community Climate Change Adaptation Plan 2020 from the town of CBS. You can look at the Green Infrastructure Ontario Coalition's website, or check out Eco Gardens. More information as well at National Resources Defense Council website. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them along to us here at Manuels River, and we'll do our very best to answer them and find more information for you. I encourage everyone to come on out if you'd like to help us christen our rain garden on the 4th of October in the afternoon. We'll be doing a ribbon cutting event, so please feel free to join us. We'd love to see you there. And thanks very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.